Hello, welcome to the 21st episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. Today I'm going to be talking about the topic of channeling and information. Information, as in, many people often ask me, well, how do you know? Where do you get that information? And why are you saying what you are saying? And where's the proof? And all these questions. So I'm going to try to clarify that. And it's going to be quite a disclosure, I think, and quite interesting also because it relates to a little bit of personal matters of my life's purpose and a few insights that I gained here and there. So the first thing to explore here is the topic of channeling. Maybe a little theoretical background. So if you followed my spiritual series here on YouTube, you'll have realized that the way that I picture reality is like an infinitely large screen where every little pixel of reality flickers infinitely fast between all possible colors or states. And so, regardless of whether you freeze this infinite screen or whether you stretch one of those pixels across time, the result will be the same. That is, on one single frame, of reality, you will have all of the sequences of all possible events that ever occurred and will occur. But the same is true for every single pixel of reality, since it flickers infinitely fast between all possible states, then everything is also contained within this one single pixel. You simply need to stretch it on a virtual screen, but this time instead of using space, you use time. And this is why, for me, space and time are exactly the same thing. It's just that we call them different things. But why am I telling you this? It is basically that it means that everything, every single piece of information is contained within every single part, which means every single atom of your body contains all of the information of the entire universe and beyond. It is just that you can put your focus on one specific state or one specific information of that atom, which is, for instance, the present moment. For instance, every atom in your body right now contains the information of you are watching me talking to you through on your screen. That is the information that you're focused on at the present. And you can focus on the past of that atom, which is still coexisting within it, which is, for instance, what happened to you yesterday, or what happened to you in a quote unquote past life, or the future of that atom, quote unquote, a future life. Those are all possible points of focus that you can have. But the problem is, if every single pixel of reality contains infinite amount of information from the remote past to the remote future, well, actually infinite amount of information is, there isn't even past or future, it's just infinity. Then how do you structure that? And how do you access it? Because ultimately, if you just want to read infinity, it's like if you have a hard drive with an infinite amount of information on it, where do you start? How do you structure it? And especially, it is in a kind of unsorted format in this sense. That is, the mere fact of you taking the form of a human is already giving a form to abstract, pure information. You're choosing to structure reality according to biology, chemistry, physics, and all these different things. That is a choice. You're choosing to read from infinity the quote unquote human program, or a human filter, or a human experience within infinity. What this means is that channeling, what is it? All these people that go into trance states or even hypnosis, these are just basically techniques techniques, various techniques to access infinity and structure it in a certain way, or read it in a certain way. A strategy for reading infinity. Strategy for accessing, let's say, accessing and modeling infinity. And the same applies to every single human. In a sense, mainstream scientists, for instance, are also channeling. We're channeling all the time. They're channeling simply whatever fits in the mainstream science box and with whatever program or whatever strategy um, is compatible with their core beliefs. Mainstream scientists are going to experience that as this. Oops, I'm very terrible at drawing. Jesus, just wanted to draw a basic light bulb. Okay. As this Eureka moment. That is, they need to give themselves permissions to have this Eureka moment. And according to some of their beliefs, to get that Eureka moment, they need to read a lot of books, they need to do a lot of studying, blah, blah, blah. But these are all just strategies for giving you the permission to read infinity in a certain way and interpret it and download information from that in a specific way. Channeling and going into hypnosis is just one way to sort of disinhibit your brain to access information and read it in a certain way. Why am I, again, talking about all of this? It's because when people ask me, where do you get your information? I am kind of sitting between the channeling and the mainstream. That is, I also experience, I sort of experience higher intuition as a mainstream scientist would, with a Eureka moments kind of thing. That is, these ideas that I have, me talking right now, for instance, about all of this, it's just something that pops into my head, but I don't experience it any differently than when you have an idea like, oh, let's go grab a pizza, or, oh, why don't I call this person? There is absolutely no difference when I receive information from a quote unquote high source. I don't even know if it's high. I have no idea. Or a basic idea like, oh, I should buy my mom a present because her birthday is coming up. There's absolutely no difference in my experiencing of getting that information. Whereas people that are channeling, typically, they experience this information as completely different from their daily lives. It's completely disconnected. So I don't know. Well, basically, it's all dependent on beliefs again. And what's your strategy and your strategy for accessing and modeling infinity? And those two sort of go together, beliefs and the strategy. And my belief, my fundamental belief, is that I give myself the permission, so to speak, to access this in this particular Eureka kind of way, where these ideas just pop into my head. And whenever they need to pop into my head, they pop into my head. And whatever I need to know on this kind of infinite journey of exploring infinity and getting more and more ideas, more and more insight, building these models and about what we're doing here, all the big metaphysical questions. If you followed my series, you see that it's just either a user from YouTube or a viewer comes and sort of says something, and that sends me off into a certain path, or I stumble upon a book, or I just have this moment of Eureka moment just randomly when I'm sitting on a bench and looking at something or whatever. There is no particular moment where that happens, but my core beliefs is that it will arrive when it needs to, and I don't need to do any specific thing to access infinity in a specific way. My When I had my spiritual awakening a year and a half or almost 2 years ago, what the fundamental question I asked is, what is the truth, but with a very candid way of asking, with no expectation as to what the answer was. And I really wanted to know the ultimate truth beyond polarity, beyond everything. Which is why, if you follow my series or my channel, you have realized by now that if you ask me what your guides want for you, and if you want to, how you can get more money or whatever, I'll be totally clueless as to how to understand, how to answer you. If you ask me very high level questions that have no real impact on your life, on your daily life, but which give you a higher vantage point on what are we doing here, where are we heading in terms of hundreds of years, not even next year, but the long, sort of big picture, um, then I'm all yours, and I can answer many of these questions because whenever somebody asks me the question, I just get an answer spontaneously. Um, and that answer feels like, if you again follow the series, feels like it's getting sharper and sharper, clearer and clearer, and reaching a sort of a global coherence. Um, um, yeah, a global coherence, which really can give you an insight into these big metaphysical questions, the why questions, especially. Why? Why are we here? What's this all about? How did it come to be? How does the universe even come into existence? Who is God, etc.? And I've been to a clairvoyant for a week last year to sort of untangle this whole spiritual awakening, and try to avoid going back into the psychiatric hospital because I really went nearly crazy. And what he revealed to me is that the kind of theme around my life and my life's purpose is power, obtaining power. Apparently, in some past life, I've reached a very high status. I had a lot of power and I abused of it. Abused power. And so in this lifetime, it's kind of a rebalancing, trying not to walk into um, those footsteps, and not to use the abilities or the skills that I had in getting power, in order not to fall into the same patterns and abuse of it. And indeed, if I look at my life, um, I've sort of always kind of been on the sidelines of power. I'm a lobbyist for a social NGO, so I'm kind of in politics, you could say, but on the sidelines, more in the quote unquote good or progressive ones, or at least that's how you can perceive it. Um, I'm never really there in the actual, where the actual decisions are made, but I'm always kind of around it. And even the way that I channel ideas, for instance, I've often been kind of jealous from of all these channelers that can go into these states, because I find that when you go into these states, it gives you a certain legitimacy. Because when you look at Bashar, when you look at all these channelers that go into a deep trance, um, they do it in this certain way where you just cannot help but feel convinced by the whole show around it, and the whole, the way they talk and everything. Whereas me, when I'm very conscious that if I listen to myself, I basically sound no different than a random high school teacher explaining a math problem or something to the students. So, it's very easy to discard basically what I'm saying and saying, eh, it's just one opinion amongst many. Um, Whereas when these channels said, when they can say also where it comes from, for instance, the source of the information, and they can say it's Jesus, or it's a certain alien race, or it's, whatever kind of energy, then you're like, oh, okay, it's this higher source, this higher vantage point, so that's trustworthy. But somebody that has absolutely no clue actually who he's channeling, where those ideas come from, it's suddenly more suspicious, and your regular kind of common sense, human common sense, and critical thinking sort of kicks in, and you cannot have this aura of the argument of authority, basically saying, well, I'm saying this, it must be true because I'm channeling it from somebody from the future. And of course, since they're more evolved and more advanced, then you have to take whatever I'm saying for granted. Of course, that's never or very rarely what these channelers say, but that is still the kind of effect it can have on the human psyche because of how we are kind of programmed in this reality, and this phenomenon of the scientist with the white blouse that will say something, and it's more credible just because they're dressed up as a scientist. And of course, if you look at the theme of my life and then why I am not capable of doing this, then it all suddenly becomes clear. Because had I been able to channel and go into a deep trance and have this aura of legitimacy, then there was a very high probability that I would have probably abused it and obtained, or trying to seek, power with it. Power over people, trying to manipulate people, trying to, well, play this power game basically of trying to win, trying to be the one that has the ultimate truth, and crushing others, contradicting others. But since I don't have this aura of legitimacy, and the way that I decide, the strategy that I have for accessing infinity is so banal, so common, so akin to any other human, it sort of protects me from falling into this temptation of seizing power. And that's the same reason why basically I'm only accessing very, very high level truths, very, very high level questions, because ultimately, again, if you listen to my spiritual series, there is absolutely no way that I can monetize what I'm saying, start opening a service for people to guide them on their path and sell them, I don't know, retreats, 2 hour, 2 hour channeling sessions to help them along their life. I mean, there's none of that. If you look at the information that I'm giving, it's just general information, or very maybe thought-provoking information, but nothing really that I can instrumentalize using this theme of power again to, how should I say, to get an edge on people, to manipulate people, to make people dependent on me, to have a lot of sort of followers that constantly ask for my help or assistance on things, simply because I cannot do that. I don't have that ability, and probably the reason why I don't have it is because I haven't sorted out this kind of life theme of mine, this grand theme that my soul is probably here to experience right now. And until I've sorted that out, I will not have access to information that might set me on this path, which I'm not supposed to go on. Now, I just wanted to touch upon a last thing that is a follow-up from the last video I've made, and this idea that consciousness can be deemed as, well, these levels that I said, like the human, the living cell, and the star, as being these fundamental colors, and then various expressions of various levels of consciousness is a blend between those in reality, like a planet would sit between a star and a living cell, and then animals would sit between cells and humans, and perhaps even a planet then can evolve into a collective consciousness. And that is what this ascension process is when basically all of the elements in the planet sort of click into behaving like a collective global organism, and then we all become part of the cell and the collective consciousness of a planet. That is evolving, we are evolving, everything is evolving. But the reason I wanted to re-explore this is that probably this is the kind of fractal mechanism, is that these ideas, or eternal ideas, of the star, the cell, the human, they are the fundamental building blocks of God's source, which tries to be very efficient in storing information and doesn't want to store any kind of useless information, and nevertheless being able to recreate an entire universe from it. And so you see, you could say that linear time is this way, but logical time is this way. So I don't know if that's clear, but basically just imagine that it's like lightning everywhere. Like there's this fractal that comes out of the star that experiences itself in all kinds of directions in infinity. And the same for the living cell. Just like lightning, it just branches off. And the same for humans, branches off into infinite. And at some point, there is a connection that is made between some of these branches. And you can start building a linear story from it. And so, now let's see, what color would I pick now so that it's going to be difficult. Let's say gray, maybe, and a much thicker size. So, and then basically maybe you can have a story that you can build now, going from past to future, that just goes along the connections of those fractals. So this is one timeline. But all of this explores itself in ever more complexity. And you could say that a connection that is made here between these as very quick bridges is the Genesis story, where God created man and everything, because the connection is made very quickly. Whereas this timeline here, for instance, you could say if those branches connect here, then you would have something like the seeding of the planet by aliens. And a story which is, or a timeline that is further away from these basic ideas, because it always grows in complexity and length, so to speak, and you always go farther and farther away from the source. This one is the sort of evolution, mainstream science timeline, Big Bang and all that stuff. And we are at a point where basically we, because we're nearly reaching a point of transcendence, where we sort of realize we've reverse engineered all of the layers below us, and fundamentally realized what it means to be human, and discovered the rules that apply to us in order to interact in a harmonious way. That also allows us to get this global picture of how things work, and understand that all timelines are real, so to speak, and that there isn't one that is more real than another, and that that gives us much more freedom then to explore infinity in the future. Because of course, the belief on, if you're, for instance, here, if you believe you're on this timeline, which is the mainstream science timeline, then your future is pretty much set. Whereas you can jump to another timeline. If you believe suddenly that aliens seeded planet Earth, then that puts you on another timeline going into the future. And if you believe that all of them are true, then the possibilities then are really infinite. And that is what's really interesting. That is really the 5D kind of switch, is when You can seamlessly switch between one belief and the other depending on where you want to go at every single moment of the present. Infinity is available to you. That is ultimately what 5D is. And so what it entails is that you cannot stick to a single belief or a single idea of what the past is or what the future is or what timeline you're on. And this is, of course, going to go progressively because I'm talking to you about this in a very theoretical way. It's not like I can do that right now, for instance, because then I could just jump out of the window and fly because I can persuade myself that I'm on a timeline where that is possible for humanity. But the theoretical part always comes first. It's always what comes first. It's just like Newton's laws about gravity, and it's the new kind of vision that it gave humanity about reality. Then 100 years later, would allow the steam engine, for instance, to be born, and tractors and all kinds of other, the industrial revolution. And Einstein's theoretical understanding of science, new understanding and theory of relativity, then 50 or 60 years down the line, led to the nuclear age. So you always start with theory, and then you gradually see the result in practice. Now, the metaphor here is it's like if you are a 5-year-old kid in a 747 airplane, and you know that theoretically you can learn how to fly. Now you know that theoretically you can fly. Does it mean that you can just say, Captain, please step down, now I want to pilot the plane? You'd probably crash in a matter of minutes. But once you gain that understanding, then you know that you can go to pilot school, you know you can have this kind of gradual process, and one day you'll be able to fly the plane. And this is the same process for us. Basically, going into 5D right now and sort of merging with your consciousness with your higher self, or doing what your higher self is doing and starting to create reality in a conscious manner, is something that is inaccessible for us because we're just not ready yet. We're exactly in the same position as that kid that wants to fly the plane. But the theoretical understanding that we can ultimately and that we will is the first step in order to do so. So I'll stop here. I hope this was interesting. I hope you now have more information about me, where I come from, why I present the information the way I do, why I channel the way I do, why I cannot tell you where my information comes from, because that is based on my beliefs and my strategy goes to read what is in infinity. And it allows you to have the freedom to disregard this if you don't like it, because I don't have any way to convince you otherwise. I don't have this aura of legitimacy and this white blouse kind of effect. And me, it protects me from being tempted to go for a power grab and trying to manipulate people and walk down the same kind of past life, your future life. I don't even know. But basically, this clairvoyant told me that power is the underlying theme of my entire life. So I may as well get used to it. So hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next video.